Not every car built in America was a success, and some were such spectacular disasters that they were effectively banned, recalled, or swept out of existence. These machines weren't just ugly or underpowered. They were dangerous, deceptive, or completely unfit for the road. Whether due to lawsuits, fire risks, illegal designs, or environmental fraud, these 8 American cars weren't just bad, they were forbidden. Here are the ultra-banned vehicles that rolled into the public eye and were quickly erased from it.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 8. By 1972, the muscle car era was entering its twilight. Insurance costs were skyrocketing, federal safety and emissions regulations were tightening, and Detroit was reluctantly beginning to comply with clean air mandates that threatened the very foundation of V8 performance. Among the last of the great muscle machines was the Buick GS Stage 1, a gentleman's bruiser with enough torque to flatten pavement and luxury to match its fury. But in California, the Stage 1 met its match, not in competition, but in smog regulations. Buick wasn't typically associated with tire-burning muscle, but the Grand Sport GS series changed that. The GS 455, especially the Stage 1 option, was a legitimate threat to better-known rivals like the Chevrolet SS 454 and GTO Judge. Engine 455 cubic-inch V8. Stage 1 specs, underrated at 270 net horsepower, previously 345 gross horsepower. 390-plus pound-feet of torque, high-lift camshaft, larger valves, and performance carb tuning. Performance 0 to 60 miles per hour in approximately 6.5 seconds, quarter mile in less than 7 seconds, the mid-14s. Impressive for a full-size car. Even with the new SAE net rating, introduced in 1972 and lower than previous gross numbers, the Stage 1 was among the fastest factory cars on sale that year. California was, and still is, the largest single auto market in the U.S. But starting in the late 1960s, it led the nation in air quality legislation. By 1972, the California Air Resources Board, CARB, imposed stricter emissions limits than federal standards. Engines required exhaust gas recirculation, EGR, and other emissions devices. Aggressive camshaft profiles and high-compression engines struggled to meet smog limits. Manufacturers had to submit separate certifications for California-bound vehicles. Despite its refinements, the Stage 1 engine's camshaft and valve timing caused it to fail California's emission tests. Buick didn't re-engineer the Stage 1 for California due to low demand for muscle cars in a post-insurance scare, post-oil crisis market. The cost of developing a compliant version for just one state. As a result, you simply couldn't buy a GS Stage 1 in California in 1972. California buyers could still order the base GS 455, but it was significantly detuned. Lower compression 8.5 to 1:1 versus 8.9 to 1. Smaller valves, less aggressive camshaft, around 225 net horsepower, down significantly from the Stage 1. It was a respectable engine, but not a fire breather. California residents were essentially locked out of Buick's highest performance offering in the muscle car's final gasp. Total GS Stage 1 production in 1972. Less than 1,000 units, depending on coupe, Yakuza convertible body styles. None were officially shipped to California. Some determined buyers brought Stage 1s across state lines, but registration was risky and often illegal without retrofitting emissions gear. Today, California Stage 1s are usually cars that were privately imported post-sale or later exempted under classic car laws. This regional ban contributes to the rarity and mystique of the 72 GS Stage 1, especially among collectors. The GS nameplate shifted to trim-only status. The 455 lived on, but in detuned, emissions-compliant form. The Stage 1 option was briefly revived in 1973 to 74, but the magic was gone, and so was the performance edge. California continued to tighten emissions laws throughout the 1970s, gradually forcing even milder big blocks off showroom floors. The GS Stage 1's California ban was one of the earliest and most dramatic examples of this trend. The 1972 Buick GS Stage 1 is a textbook case of how regulatory pressure ended the muscle car era. Not through bans of cars, but bans on specific engines in key states like California. Though short-lived and unavailable in America's car-crazy capital, the GS Stage 1 remains one of the most refined and potent muscle cars ever built. A misunderstood masterpiece that couldn't breathe in the smoggy air of California. Number 7. By 1981, the Chevrolet Camaro Z28 was one of the last surviving names from the muscle car golden era. With bold graphics, scooped hoods, and available V8 power, it still carried the image of American performance, even if actual performance had declined. However, in California, the Z28's flagship 350 cubic inch V8 engine was suddenly off the table. Due to emissions certification issues, the high-output 350 couldn't be sold in California in 1981, the last year of the second-generation Camaro. This left Golden State buyers with a neutered 305 V8 or the choice to skip the Z28 entirely. Engine 350C ID 5.7-liter V8 rated at 175 horsepower with 4-barrel carb and dual exhaust. Transmission, automatic TH350, or manual 4-speed, depending on options. Performance 0 to 60 in approximately 9 seconds. Quick for the emissions era. Styling, functional hood scoop, bold graphics, rear spoiler, fender flares. The 1981 Z28 was essentially a cosmetic and handling package wrapped around a V8. It had long abandoned its late 60s road racing roots, but still symbolized performance to a generation of enthusiasts, even if the numbers no longer wowed. The LM1350 V8, used in the 1981 Z28, was not certified for sale in California. GM either failed to submit it for California emissions testing or couldn't make it pass due to lack of compatible air injection and EGR equipment, carburetor tuning that couldn't meet strict NOx and CO thresholds. GM's budget and engineering priorities, especially with the all-new 1982 Camaro on the horizon. Californians who still wanted a Camaro Z28 in 1981 had to settle for a 305 CID 5.0 LV8 paired with automatic transmission only. Horsepower, 165 horsepower, 10 fewer than the 350. Torque, approximately 240 pound-feet versus 275 in the 350. Performance, noticeably slower acceleration, less low-end punch. Even worse, the California 305 often came with taller gearing, further strangling off-the-line performance. In an era already short on muscle, this was a bitter pill. The Camaro Z28 in California became a look-fast, go-slow machine. For a car marketed on aggressive styling and legacy muscle car appeal, the downgrade felt like a betrayal. By 1981, California Air Resources Board, CARB, regulations were stricter than federal EPA standards, requiring more advanced catalytic converters, air pumps, and fuel mixture controls. Targeting larger displacement engines, which produced more NOx, nitrogen oxide. GM, focusing its resources on upcoming fuel-injected 1982 models, chose not to engineer a compliant version of the 350 for California. 1981 was the final year of the second generation, 1970 to 1981. Camaro. The platform was heavy, bloated by safety and emissions gear, aged with technology dating back to the early 1970s, outgunned by imports and newer competitors. The next generation Camaro, 1982, would debut with sleeker styling, smaller engines, including the return of fuel-injected 305s, no 350 V8 initially, and no Z28 with big block performance heritage. So for California buyers, 1981 offered no true Z28 experience, and 1982 wouldn't fix that overnight. 1981 Z28s with the 350 are non-existent in California VINs. Some cars were privately imported into California, but faced registration and smog compliance challenges. Today, California-compliant 305 Z28s are less desirable among collectors, Though they remain a curiosity of emissions-era regulation, the situation highlights a wider trend of performance cars being split regionally based on environmental rules. The 1981 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 in California was a casualty of its time. Despite a nation hungry for performance nostalgia, environmental realities, especially in California, made power a liability. As the curtain fell on the second-gen Camaro, California buyers were denied access to the last real muscle of the series. It was a moment that symbolized the death of classic muscle in America's car culture capital. Number 6. By 1977, the golden era of the American muscle car was long over, but one corner of the market still demanded raw horsepower: law enforcement. While civilian muscle cars were being strangled by emissions laws and insurance costs, police fleets still needed pursuit-rated vehicles capable of catching up to anything on the road. Dodge answered the call with the Royal Monaco equipped with a 440 cubic inch V8, but this wasn't your average family sedan. This version of the Royal Monaco was never intended for civilians, and in many states, it wasn't even legal to register one for private use. The Royal Monaco was Dodge's full-size C-body car, big, boxy, and heavily built. Though sales were slowing due to gas prices and downsizing trends, it was still Dodge's flagship sedan in 1977. Key attributes: body style, full-size four-door sedan, chassis, heavy-duty C-body platform. Interior, stripped down for police duty with optional bucket seats, certified speedometer, and basic trim. The 440 CID V8 was the crown jewel of Mopar muscle through the late 60s and early 70s. But by 1977, it had been dropped from most civilian applications due to emissions and fuel economy standards. The police version of the 440 had high lift camshaft, dual exhaust, no catalytic converters in some variants, extra cooling and heavy-duty alternator, estimated 255 to 275 net horsepower. Actual output may have been higher in practice. This made it one of the fastest cars you could not buy as a civilian. Police vehicles were considered exempt under certain federal and state emissions laws, meaning they could use non-catalyst equipped engines. They weren't subject to CAFE fuel economy averages. They had less restrictive noise and emissions limits. Because of this, the 1977 Royal Monaco 440 could run aggressive cam profiles, high-flow manifolds, and unrestricted exhaust. Many states, especially California and New York, prohibited these cars from being registered for civilian use. The Fleet 440 often omitted catalytic converters entirely, a major reason for its non-certification for public sale. The absence of CATs meant higher emissions output, incompatibility with unleaded gasoline, automatic disqualification from state-level emissions inspections. The Royal Monaco 440 was Dodge's answer to the Ford LTD Police Interceptor, the Chevrolet Impala 9C1, and smaller performance units like the Pontiac Le Mans Enforcer. Features law enforcement valued: massive torque for highway pursuit, rugged body-on-frame construction, superior cooling and braking. It became a staple on highways often used by state troopers, county sheriff departments, municipal police forces needing high-speed capabilities. Despite interest from performance enthusiasts, the 440 Royal Monaco was not made available to the public, and attempting to own one came with serious challenges. Dealerships wouldn't sell them without proof of fleet credentials. Some were later decommissioned and sold at auction, but couldn't be registered in emissions-restricted states, had to be retrofitted with smog equipment to pass inspection, which often neutered performance. Were frequently rejected outright by DMV offices. A handful were registered in lenient states, like parts of the Midwest or South, but they remained extremely rare. The 1977 model year was the final run for the full-size Royal Monaco, before Dodge shifted toward the downsized St. Regis and eventually exited the full-size segment entirely by the early 80s. The 440 engine was retired for cars after 1978, surviving only in motorhomes and some trucks. Police departments began moving to mid-size vehicles for better fuel economy. Dodge's pursuit vehicle lineage shifted to the Diplomat and eventually the Charger decades later. Surviving 440 Royal Monacos are prized by collectors, especially former police units in original trim. Due to emissions restrictions, they're difficult to find in California, New York, or other strict states. Some enthusiasts have restored ex-police versions for car shows, movies, or vintage fleet reenactments. The car's most famous pop culture appearance, as the Bluesmobile in the Blues Brothers, although that specific one was a 1974 Monaco. The 1977 Dodge Royal Monaco 440 was a rolling relic of a fading era, a last-gasp muscle car that lived not on Main Street, but in the fleet yards of state patrols. Too loud, too dirty, and too thirsty for the average driver, it was a weapon of the state, not the street. Today, it stands as a rare and fascinating example of performance living on through loopholes, even as muscle cars disappeared from the civilian world. Number 5, by the late 1960s, Pontiac was riding high on its performance reputation. The GTO had ignited the muscle car craze, and Pontiac was eager to inject that same spirit into its full-size lineup, including the Bonneville. A car more often associated with plush interiors and long highway drives. Enter the 428 high-output V8. Available in the 1969 Bonneville, the 428 high-output was a fire-breathing power plant typically reserved for performance cars like the Grand Prix SJ or the Catalina 2+2. It turned the otherwise luxurious Bonneville into a sleeper powerhouse, but it wouldn't last long. Platform full-size B-body, shared with other GM brands like Chevrolet Impala and Buick LeSabre. Position, top-tier Pontiac sedan and coupe below the Grand Prix. Style, sweeping lines, hidden headlamps on some trims, and luxury-level interiors. The 1969 model was offered in several body styles: two-door hardtop, four-door sedan, and hardtop, convertible. Buyers could opt for increasingly luxurious trims. But if they checked the right boxes, they could also option up to serious muscle under the hood. Displacement, 428 cubic inches, 7.0 liters. Horsepower, 390 horsepower at 5,200 revolutions per minute. Torque, 465 pound-feet at 3,400 RPM. Carburation, quadrajet 4-barrel, Jag camshaft, high lift, performance tune. Exhaust, dual system, low restriction. This was the most powerful engine ever offered in the Bonneville and nearly matched the torque of GM's famous 454 V8. With this setup, the Bonneville could accelerate 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 6.5 to 7.0 seconds. Top out over 130 miles per hour if you dared. For a car weighing over 4,200 pounds, this was shocking performance, and not something typically associated with a luxury cruiser. The Bonneville buyer in 1969 typically wanted luxury, comfort, and prestige, not dragstrip dominance. Pontiac's decision to offer supercar levels of power in a big sedan was bold, but it left many buyers wondering, why? Most opted for the standard 400 V8 or base 428, 370 horsepower, which offered better balance for the car's character. The insurance industry had already begun to crack down on muscle cars after years of rising accident rates and increasing fatalities. The combination of a full-size weight, near 400 horsepower output, no traction control or modern braking, made the 428 HO Bonneville uninsurable for many younger or riskier buyers. Some insurers flat-out refused coverage or imposed exorbitant premiums, which killed retail interest. For 1970, Pontiac dropped the 428 altogether across all models and replaced it with the 455 CIDV, 8 powerful on paper. The 455s were detuned for torque and smoothness, especially in luxury cars. The HO version of the 428 was not directly replaced in the Bonneville. The 455s didn't reach quite the same performance peak until tuned for Trans Ams or Grand Prix later. The 1969 Bonneville 428 HO is one of those rare instances where luxury and raw muscle collided, however briefly. Today it is highly collectible among Pontiac enthusiasts. Extremely rare, as most Bonnevilles came with lower-tier engines. Considered a gentleman's hot rod, big, bold, and brutally fast in a straight line, in a sense, it was Pontiac's answer to the Q-Ship, a car that looked refined but packed a punch that few saw coming. The 1969 Pontiac Bonneville 428 HO was a brilliant experiment, a chance to bring high-octane muscle to the upper-class crowd. But with insurers cracking down, buyers confused, and the muscle era peaking, it simply couldn't last. By 1970, it was gone. And just like that, Pontiac's full-size luxury sedans returned to quieter, more docile lives, leaving the 428 HO Bonneville as one of the last true full-size monsters of its time. Number 4. By the mid-1970s, muscle cars were reeling. High insurance rates, rising gas prices, and new federal emissions mandates were transforming the performance car landscape. General Motors, eager to keep the excitement alive in the compact segment, introduced the Chevrolet Monza in 1975, a sporty fastback coupe built on the bones of the Vega. But while GM was ready to drop a V8 into this subcompact for performance-hungry buyers, California's air quality laws said otherwise. In a stunning twist, the Monza V8 couldn't be sold in the state it was partly designed to compete in. Platform: GMH body shared with the Vega Pontiac Astra Buick Skyhawk, Oldsmobile Starfire. Body style: two-door fastback coupe. Market position: sporty economy car, slotted below the Camaro. Design inspiration: aerodynamic shape intended originally to house GM's stillborn rotary Wankel engine, meant to blend the compact size and affordability of a Vega with the V8 performance of a Camaro. Styled to look fast and modern, advertised as a new generation of performance car for the post-oil embargo era. In 1975, GM dropped its new 262 cubic inch small block V8 into the Monza, a compact engine derived from the legendary 350, scaled down to meet new emissions and fuel economy concerns. Horsepower: approximately 110 to 120 horsepower net. Transmission: 3-speed manual or optional 4-speed automatic. Exhaust: single with catalytic converter. Performance: 0 to 60 miles per hour in approximately 11 seconds. Not fast, but quick for its class. Eventually, a 305 V8 would be offered later in the Monza's run, with slightly more grunt. By 1975, California Air Resources Board, CARB, had imposed the strictest vehicle emissions laws in the U.S., predating federal EPA mandates by several years. Key requirements: tighter hydrocarbon and NOx limits, mandatory use of catalytic converters, exhaust gas recirculation, EGR, early computer-controlled carburetors and air-fuel monitoring. The 262 V8 in the Monza did not meet California's 1975 emissions certification. The engine was not yet equipped with the complex smog control systems California required. GM had no approved configuration that satisfied CARB's rules for the V8-powered Monza at launch. As a result, the Monza V8 was not available for sale in California in 1975. Californians were limited to the 4-cylinder Vega engine, Buick-sourced 231 V6 early models, both of which were underwhelming compared to what buyers in other states could get. The Monza's engine bay was originally engineered to hold a GM rotary Wankel engine, abandoned due to fuel economy and emissions issues. Later, the small block V8, which fit, barely, after engineering contortions. But even with that preparation, tight engine space made heat management and emissions control difficult. California's rules were just too strict, too early. It's ironic, a car designed to bring V8 fun to a new generation couldn't sell its most exciting version in America's biggest car market. By 1976, GM had revised its emission systems, and the Monza V8 was finally approved for sale in California. But by then, the buzz had cooled. The Monza V8's one-year ban in 2003 California hurt early sales momentum. It remained a niche performance car in other states, eventually overshadowed by better-developed Camaro and Firebird models. The Monza continued through 1980, slowly losing relevance as performance dwindled and competition improved. Today, the 1975 Monza V8 non-California models are rare, especially unmodified survivors. interesting as forbidden fruit cars in the Golden State, part of a larger pattern of how emissions laws fractured the U.S. muscle market. Collectors and enthusiasts now look at them as the beginning of the end for V8s in small cars, a reminder of how quickly performance could be legislated away. The 1975 Chevrolet Monza V8 tells a story of ambition cut short by regulation. It wasn't a great performer, and it wasn't a true muscle car, but it was supposed to bridge the gap between economy and excitement. Unfortunately for GM, California, the heart of car culture, wasn't interested in compromise. And so the Monza V8 missed its moment in the sun there, becoming a symbol of how fast-changing emissions laws reshaped the auto industry. Number 3. In the mid-1970s, Cadillac stunned the American luxury market with the launch of the compact yet upscale Seville. Lincoln, scrambling to respond, rushed out its own version of a small luxury sedan, the Versailles, introduced in 1977. But while Cadillac engineered the Seville from the ground up, Lincoln simply took the existing Ford Granada Mercury Monarch platform, gave it a facelift, added more chrome and leather, and called it a Lincoln. In 1978, Lincoln briefly offered a 400 cubic inch V8 option. But this big block engine couldn't meet tightening urban emission standards, especially in smog-regulated regions like California. The 400 V8 was quickly pulled, leaving the Versailles even more lost in the luxury shuffle. Platform, Ford's compact Fox body predecessor, shared with Granada and Monarch. Position, entry-level Lincoln, below the Continental. Body style, four-door sedan only. Base price, $1978. Approximately $11,500, quite high for its size and equipment. Padded vinyl roof, with faux Landau styling, crystal-cut opera windows, optional crushed velour, or leather interiors. First U.S. production car with clear coat paint. First Lincoln with halogen headlights. Despite these advancements, critics and buyers saw it as a Granada in disguise, and rightly so. Most of its sheet metal and mechanical components were directly lifted from Ford and Mercury models. Power, approximately 166 to 173 horsepower, net depending on emission package. Torque, approximately 315 pound-feet. Carburetor, 2-barrel motorcraft. Transmission 3-speed C6 automatic. The 400 was a big block Ford engine, designed more for effortless torque and smoothness than outright performance. On paper, it seemed ideal for a small luxury car until it met the real-world challenge of late 70s emission standards. By 1978, the Clean Air Act had entered its second major enforcement phase, and urban markets like California, New York, and Chicago required vehicles to meet tougher standards for hydrocarbons, HC, carbon monoxide, CO, nitrogen oxides, NOx. The 400 V8 struggled with this due to its older combustion chamber design, which couldn't burn fuel cleanly, limited compatibility with catalytic converters and EGR systems, high compression and displacement, a challenge for smog tuning. In response, Lincoln began pulling the 400 V8 from certain markets mid-1978. In California, it was never fully approved for Versailles use that year. Lincoln never officially announced the cancellation of the 400 option. It simply disappeared from brochures and dealer order sheets in high-emission states. By mid-year, most Versailles units shipped with the smaller 302 Windsor 5.8, producing only approximately 129 horsepower. The 400 V8 was supposed to bring quiet, effortless power to the Versailles, but buyers weren't cross-shopping Lincolns for muscle anymore. The emissions-tuned 400 wasn't particularly fast anyway. 0 to 60 took over 11 seconds, and fuel economy was dismal, single digits in the city. It added weight and complexity to an already compromised package. Today, the 1978 Versailles with a 400 V8 is extremely rare, especially in smog-regulated states, sought after mostly by Lincoln completionists or oddball collectors. A case study in how federal and state-level emissions laws could effectively eliminate engine options mid-cycle. While the Versailles was never a strong seller, total production across 4 years barely broke 50,000 units. The 400 V8 models are among the least remembered due to their short-lived and geographically restricted run. The 1978 Lincoln Versailles 400 V8 was a car built in a rush, equipped with an engine that couldn't survive the political climate it was born into. Meant to add prestige, the 400 V8 ultimately highlighted the disconnect between Lincoln's aspirations and regulatory reality. It's a reminder that even within a single model year, the American automotive industry had to pivot quickly or get crushed under the weight of new emissions laws. By 1980, the Versailles was gone, and so was the idea that a rebadged compact with a big engine could wear the Lincoln badge with pride. Number 2. The early 1970s were a pivotal time for American muscle cars. Insurance surcharges, emissions regulations, and safety mandates were rapidly transforming performance cars from fire-breathing legends into sluggish shadows of themselves. The Dodge Dart 340 Sport, introduced as a compact but potent alternative to heavier muscle cars, stood as a beacon of Mopar engineering in the shrinking performance segment. But by 1973, the writing was on the wall. Emissions regulations, especially in California, were tightening to the point where Dodge could no longer keep the 340 engine viable. By the end of 1973, the Dart 340 Sport and the high-winding 340 V8 itself was on borrowed time. The Dodge Dart began life as an economy compact in the early 1960s, but by the late 60s, it had morphed into a surprisingly muscular performer in the form of the Dart GTS and later the Swinger 340. Lightweight chassis, around 3,000 pounds, much lighter than a Charger or Coronet. Muscle car V8, the 340 small block was tuned for performance rather than just displacement. Affordable insurance. As a compact, it avoided some of the high premiums of full-size muscle cars. In 1973, Dodge simplified the performance Dart lineup, offering the 340 Sport as the final iteration of the compact muscle Dart. Displacement, 340 cubic inches, 5.6 liters. Compression ratio dropped to approximately 8.5 to 1:1 from earlier 10.5 to 1. Carburetor, 4-barrel, output, net, 1973. Approximately 240 horsepower, down from gross ratings over 275 in previous years. Torque, approximately 290 pound-feet. The 340 was lauded for its balance of performance and efficiency. In a small car like the Dart, it delivered impressive straight-line speed with 0 to 60 times in the mid 6-second range when properly equipped. But 1973 was a turning point. By the early 1970s, new federal EPA mandates and state-level emissions controls, especially in California, began to bite hard. What changed in 1973? Mandated EGR, exhaust gas recirculation systems, lower allowable NOx emissions, use of leaner fuel mixtures, reducing power. Catalytic converter requirements looming for 1975. Stricter evaporative emissions control, fuel vapor recovery systems. These systems robbed the engine of power and introduced detonation issues in high compression setups. The once high-strung 340 had to be retuned, detuned, and desmogged, which led to a significant drop in performance. California, through its Air Resources Board, CARB, had stricter than federal emissions requirements starting in the late 60s. By 1973, the 340 V8 was barely compliant in most states. In California, it was increasingly difficult and expensive to certify without severe tuning compromises. Dodge faced a dilemma: invest heavily to redesign the 340 or abandon it. The latter option won. After 1973, the Dart 340 Sport was discontinued. The 340 engine was phased out entirely after 1973, replaced by the 360 V8 in 1973. The 1974 Dart 360 had a larger bore and lower compression, making it easier to meet emissions targets, but it was heavier and less lively. Thus, the Dart 360 Sport replaced the 340 model. But performance had taken a major hit. Today, the 1973 Dart 360-300 Sport is remembered as the final performance-focused Dart before the muscle car era ended. One of the last uncatalyzed V8 Darts, a collector's item, especially in high-trim or original California models, which are rare due to certification difficulties. But more importantly, it represents a turning point, when even a small, potent muscle car couldn't escape the reach of emissions control. The 1973 Dodge Dart 340 Sport was a great concept, a light, quick, affordable muscle car with real street cred. But it arrived just as the regulatory environment changed, and its engine became a casualty of a new political and environmental reality. It wasn't banned outright, but it was slowly suffocated by smog rules until Dodge gave up. In many ways, this car marks the quiet death of Mopar's small block performance era. Number 1. By 1968, the muscle car era was in full swing. Detroit automakers were engaged in a high-stakes arms race to deliver the fastest, wildest machines to dominate both the streets and the drag strip. But some cars, like the 1968 Ford Fairlane 500R code with the 427, were never truly meant for regular buyers. This was not just a muscle car. It was a street-legal factory dragster, engineered to blow the competition off the quarter-mile line and then quietly vanish, strangled by emissions, safety, and internal policy bans. It was one of the last great factory street racers before regulation began to shut the party down. Model Fairlane 500 two-door post sedan, Dart R code, Ford's designation for 427 cubic inch dual quad V8 cars. Production? Under 100 units, some sources cite 57 to 70 built. Purpose? NHRA Superstock/A and B factory experimental competition. MSRP? Around $3,500 to $4,000, depending on options. This wasn't your everyday Fairlane. Ford stripped it down. Lightweight bench seats, no power steering or brakes, reinforced engine mounts, and the heaviest-duty drivetrain available. It was a purpose-built race car disguised as a sedan. Displacement: 427 cubic inches, 7.0 liters. Configuration: side-oiler FE series, V8, carburation, dual Holley 4 barrels, compression 11.6 to 1, premium fuel only. Output claimed 425 horsepower at 6,000 RPM. Torque, approximately 480 pound-feet at 3,700 RPM. Transmission, top-loader 4-speed manual. Rear axle, 9-inch Ford with 4.30 or 4.56 gears, Detroit locker. This was the same basic engine used in Le Mans-winning GT40s, NASCAR stockers, and Thunderbolt drag racers. In R-code trim, it was essentially race-tuned from the factory. Performance estimates: 0 to 60 miles per hour, approximately 5.5 seconds mile, approximately 12.5 seconds at 115 plus miles per hour, with slicks. Despite being technically street legal, the Fairlane 500R code was quickly withdrawn from public availability due to a combination of federal regulations, safety standards, and Ford's own internal restrictions. The 427 was high compression and carbureted, with no emission controls. No provision for PCV, EGR, or evaporative emissions, all soon to be required. Too dirty for California or upcoming federal EPA standards. Lightweight bodywork, minimal interior padding, and no energy-absorbing bumpers. Failed to meet new FMVSS federal motor vehicle safety standards, crash and bumper requirements, particularly front-end impact tolerances. After a brief build window in early 1968, Ford corporate ordered the R-code Fairlane removed from dealer ordering systems. They feared liability issues if sold to the public. It was too fast, too raw, and not crash-worthy. 4. Insurance restrictions. Insurance companies had begun to blacklist cars with extreme horsepower ratings. R-code. Fairlane 427 was considered uninsurable for street use by most major carriers. Most R-code Fairlane 500s were sold, direct to drag racers, via dealer-backed channels like Tasca Ford or Holman Moody, with strict limitations including waiver of warranty in some cases. Ford did not promote this car in mainstream advertising. There were no glossy brochures or magazine spreads. It was a ghost model, known only to those in the racing or enthusiast community. Today, surviving examples of the 1968 R-Code Fairlane 500 are extremely valuable. Often found in vintage drag racing collections, restored with period-correct speed parts, documented through VINs starting with 8K or 8H, indicating Kansas City or Lorraine. Plant. They are regarded as the last gasp of Ford's factory drag cars, spiritual successors to the Thunderbolt. A perfect storm of race engineering meeting federal shutdown. The 1968 Ford Fairlane 500 R-Code 427 was the kind of car no company would dare sell today. A barely contained weapon built for drag strips but delivered through dealership back doors. It was too fast, too raw, and too non-compliant for the future. While it wasn't banned by federal law in a single declaration, the effect was the same. It was eliminated by a combination of emission standards, safety laws, and Ford's fear of liability. As the 60s closed, so too did the door on factory-built monsters like the R-Code Fairlane. It remains a mythic beast of Detroit muscle lore, ferocious, rare, and silenced by the rulebook.